What's up, everybody? Matt Gajewski here, back again with the Stochastic DFS channel. And today we're talking college football DFS ahead of the Week 3 main slate. Before we get started, make sure to hit that thumbs up button, subscribe to the channel, and hit the notification bell so you know when this and all other content goes live. We're also brought to you by Caesar Sportsbook. They have a new offer for you guys. Bet $50 and you are going to get $250 in the form of free bets. The first one will be paid out. They're in $50 increments, by the way. First one will be paid out right after that first wager settles. And then the next four will come each of the next 4 weeks. These need to be used within 7 days of issuance. If you or someone you know has a gambling problem, please call or text 1-800-GAMBLER. All right, we dive into the slate. One housekeeping note, I'm recording this a little earlier than usual. Generally, I like to have the projections done, so I've had a first run over this slate, kind of get an idea where ownership is. I'm about 75% through with that. I have to travel this weekend. My old college roommate is getting married. Ryan, shout out to you. I do not condone this behavior of having fall weddings, but at least you had the decency to do it on Friday. So with that out of the way, let's dive right in. Kicking things off, we'll start with Florida State, Boston College. Weather concerns in this game. That's why the total's coming down. 49 is where it's sitting at right now. Florida State is still a 26.5-point favorite. Game environment stuff, it's a huge look-ahead spot for Florida State. They're traveling to Clemson next week, so Boston College has been pretty weak. They hung around with an FCS team last week. How motivated is Florida State? Just questions worth asking. Nothing really actionable. I think it's all factored into the spread. But you got Jordan Travis here. Hyper expensive price on him. He hasn't been running a ton to start the year. I think that's largely just because you had one really competitive game, one not so competitive game. At 9,700, I honestly think this depends how much you think he plays. And at 9,700, there's quite a bit of risk that he comes out of this game early. Florida State has a ton of injuries. So I think this is one where, they take care of Boston College early on the road, on the ground, not on the road. Take care of them on the ground, and then they get out of this game. So I'm a little worried about Travis. I'm also a little worried about the ball carriers here. Trey Benson, Lawrence Tolafili. Rodney Hill has had 5 carries in each of the last 2 games. Neither was particularly close. The LSU one was a little closer than expected, but what that says to me is he at least plays a small part in this backfield, and we know Tolafili is going to handle the ball on third downs. Trey Benson at 6,600, a little bit risky here too. Basically, even though Florida State has a massive implied team total, I think there's a little bit more risk baked into these guys just with uncertain playing time. At receiver, Keon Coleman has been an absolute monster to start the year. Don't see this changing. Johnny Wilson's also questionable for the game, so maybe you even see more opportunities funneled to Keon Coleman. If you could guarantee me Wilson's healthy, and I don't think he is, I actually think there's a really good chance he sits out of this game. I would love him as a buy low. He should not be more expensive than Keon Coleman right now, so this would strictly be a GPP leverage play. But right now, straight up, Keon Coleman's one of the better receiving plays on the slate. Again, does he come out of the game early? Weather concerns, still a bit risky. Jaheim Bell's an awesome tight end play. I love him at 4,200. He gets a carry once in a while. Did not need to use him in their most recent game over an FCS school, but he'll play a ton when the going is tough. He has about a 70% route rate in competitive games here. The wide receiver 3 is a rotation. Winston Wright played a good amount in week 1. You also have guys like Deuce Spann getting on the field. I think Hakeem Williams is going to play a little more in the future for this team. So there's a little bit of volatility here behind Jaheim Bell, Johnny Wilson, and Keon Coleman. It's not really a spot I like, especially in the game environment, which is so troublesome to evaluate here with the weather and the blowout risk. So I'm going to probably just avoid all of the ancillary receivers. If you force me to pick one, I would still pick Winston Wright, but I don't feel good about it, honestly. The Boston College side, they're implied for 11 points. Your best course of action is just to fade this game. Florida State has been somewhat giving on the ground. LSU was actually really efficient there, and then they played an FCS school. Boston College made the switch to Thomas Castellanos at quarterback, 5,700. He runs a ton. Florida State actually recruited him as a running back. Is that enough to get it done here? Because he's not going to have much success throwing. Like Florida State's secondary is awesome. The additions they made with like Fentrell Cypress, this is going to be an elite pass defense. I don't think Castellanos is built to exploit this. So he's not going to be high on my card. I'm not going to X him out, but I'm also not sure I'm going to get a lot of him. And I would guess that I do not. Pat Garb was questionable here at running back. I do not think he plays. He hasn't practiced yet this week. And they kind of thrust Kai Robichaud, the Western Kentucky transfer, into a bell cow role. Again, what's the efficiency like? He does catch passes, but how many passes come his way with the new offense being run heavy? Again, they have a 58% pass rate so far this year. I do not think we see that much passing with Castellanos under center from start to finish in a full game. A lot of that was with Moorhead, who started the first game. Expect some changes for Boston College overall with the offense here. If you do play a receiver, for me, it's still Ryan O'Keefe. He's kind of run a little bit behind Lewis Bond, I guess, in terms of targets, but it's very close. You also have Joseph Griffin, who's technically run the most routes at 83%. Just fell down the target totem pole a little bit last week with one target. None of them really have intriguing prices to me. It would be a Lewis Bond or pass in the pass game for me. Again, weather concerns. I doubt I'll get any of them. Game 2 is Penn State taking on Illinois, 14.5 point spread, 48.5 total. Some interest in this game for me, especially on the Penn State side, implied above 31 points. Drew Aller has been solid to start the year. I don't think he's going to be the most mobile signal caller at any point this season, but he's not taking sacks. And Illinois' defensive line has been a liability, shockingly. I did not think they were going to be this bad. It was supposed to be the strength of their defense, but they have not lived up to expectation. So I don't think Aller is pressured much here, and he's shown the ability to get it done through the air. You have Harrison Wallace. You have Keandre Lambert-Smith, who I'm now realizing is not on this chart. He should be. He's ahead of Harrison Wallace. So I'll update that on the back end. What I can tell you is that Keandre Lambert-Smith is their very clear wide receiver 1. Harrison Wallace is their 2. And then they've had a bit of a rotation beyond that. Malik Mega is out. Last game, they used more 12 personnel. They didn't do that in week 1. So you actually saw Theo Johnson and Tyler Warren on the field quite a bit together. Their overall route rates, Warren's at 46% on the year, and Johnson's at 53.8%. They both were above 50 last week. So that pulled a wide receiver 3 off the field. When they did use one, it was a rotation. Liam Clifford had the most routes. So far, he's sitting at 48%. That's ahead of Malik McClain and Dante Cephas. But I do think that third receiver is a rotation, and it's going to be cannibalized by 2 tight end sets at times here. In close games, especially against Illinois, expect them to use a lot of Theo Johnson and Tyler Warren. They did that last year, and I don't anticipate this changing. They have really good tight ends. For Illinois, 17-point implied team total keeps them in play. Luke Altmaier at 6,200. I don't love this. Illinois' offensive line has shown cracks. This is the toughest matchup they've faced yet this year. They're going to be pressured. Altmaier's been awesome running, but he hasn't really, against Kansas and against Toledo, they still gave up 8 sacks. Now he's facing Penn State. How many sacks is this unit going to give up against the Nittany Lions? I'm worried about Altmaier at this price tag. With that said, Illinois is probably going to be down and throwing the ball. You could maybe play a one-off receiver. Isaiah Washington, Pat Bryant, Casey Washington are the very clear top 3 receivers on this team. They do not rotate a ton. And Williams is a target monster, over 30% target share going back to last year. That's held steady. You play a one-off, it's Williams, but I'm scared with the scoring expectation. The backfield's been really bad, and it's a committee between Reggie Love and Josh McCray. Love is separated somewhat, but 4,200 is still not even that good of a price tag. And the pass catching role for these guys is not great. Love is sitting at 3 targets on the year. His route rate is 22.5%. They're actually using McCray over him in the pass game. So still not a big fan of Love. And I promise we're starting off with 2 games I don't love. We'll get to some solid ones. We actually do now. LSU, Mississippi State. This is a great game. The total's at 54. I actually like the over in the game. Spread's 9.5 in favor of LSU. LSU's fast, they're pass heavy, and they're going to exploit a Mississippi State defense that's rebuilt and relatively untested. And they got carved up by Jaden Daniels, but you know how it is with Jaden Daniels. He throws the 4 picks, they lose the game, they still cover. Mississippi State's defense has questions, and now they're facing an even better offense. Jaden Daniels comes to town. This guy is elite in terms of his mobility. He led the team in rushing last year. He's averaging over 300 passing yards per game. Kind of needed to against Florida State here. But he has awesome receivers. Neighbor's going to be your 1. Brian Thomas is your clear 2. And then Kyron Lacey rotates a little bit, but he's your 3. I think they're all priced efficiently. Stacks are solid here. I'll be running LSU stacks without a doubt in this game. And I think you can play Mason Taylor. He's questionable. Don't worry about that. He's going to play in this game. 63% route rate for Taylor. He's the stone, like cheap punt option I'd be looking to if you're like double stacking or something. He's a little tight end or bust, but he's going to play here. Toughest evaluation is the running back room. And we haven't even seen John Emery or Armani Goodwin. They both could play in this game. LSU has not been consistent whatsoever. In week 1, we saw Trey Bradford play a decent amount, Josh Williams and Noah Cain. Last week, we saw mostly Logan Diggs and Caleb Jackson. Caleb Jackson's their, stud freshman. How much work does he get moving forward? I personally think maybe they involve him more because Cain, Williams, Bradford have been pretty lackluster. All this to say, I don't know what LSU is going to do, and I've been incorrect predicting them the whole way. Week 1, I thought they might use a lot of Diggs. He literally didn't have a touch. And then week 2, he comes out with 16 when I thought they were going to use Josh Williams. So this is a little bit of roulette right now, and I anticipate them having multiple guys active. So I don't really think you want to take shots here. This is going to be extremely dicey. And then on the other side, Mississippi State changes offense. It looks like Yoda showed me this graphic last year. Would have told you you're crazy. They were towards the top in pace. They're now 116th in seconds per play. Their pass rate, they were the highest in the country. They're now sitting at 34%. The best matchup for them to exploit here is LSU, who's doing a little bit of roulette in their secondary as well. They've already started 2 different safeties, 2 different corners in back-to-back games, moving to a true freshman at one of those positions, and a Denver Harris Texas A&M transfer. We'll see how that goes. The best matchup Mississippi State has is through the air. Whether they use that or not, I'm not sure. They should, but we'll see if their coaching staff is hell-bent on establishing the run as they have been through 2 games, or if they're willing to diverge, playing to the matchup strengths that they have, because they still have Will Rogers. And, for DFS purposes, he's never that interesting to me, especially in this new offense, because he takes so many sacks. He's negative 22 rushing yards in the year. Like back in the Mike Leach air raid, Will Rogers was almost a lock to get 300 yards. That is no longer the case. So he's almost unplayable at this price, in my opinion. Like he's going to need to backdoor his way to 300 yards through efficiency. With that said, Joe Marks still there at running back. I mean, we know what he can do as a pass catcher. And now he's alone. He's alone in the backfield. Dylan Johnson's gone. He's had 19 and 24 carries. He's had 5 and 4 targets. Even as an underdog here, you can play Joe Marks at any price point, really, under like 7,500, and we get an affordable one at 68. Oh, one other thing with Will Rogers is they've taken him out a couple times for Mike Wright. These are clear like wildcat situations. If you're an NFL fan, think like Taysom Hill at quarterback, but it doesn't help Will Rogers. Certainly doesn't help him. The pass game, Lydetrick Griffin's your clear wide receiver 1 so far. He has 11 targets. Never thought I'd say that about a Mississippi State receiver, but he hasn't led the team in routes. That would be Justin Robinson. So you're looking for a cheaper guy at 4,800. He'd be a person I'd look to. Antonio Harmon also has a 62% route rate. He only has 1 target, but I mean, a lot of you guys are looking for dart throws. I would throw Antonio Harmon's name out there. Just the 1 target this year, but a 62% route rate is good in this offense. Moving to our next game, Kansas State, Missouri. 5-point spread in favor of Kansas State, 48 total. We've got Missouri taking some money here. I personally bet them. Volatile game, just getting an SEC home dog. But let's get to DFS. Will Howard, little bit of a game manager, not running as much as he has in previous seasons. That worries me, but I honestly like his receivers more than anything else. Still, this is a tough matchup for Will Howard, who's not running as much. I mean, the strength of this Missouri defense is their secondary. They'll bring back a ton of production here. And I honestly like the under in this game. Think this could be a real grinded out type game for both sides. Among the pass catchers, Phillip Brooks, RJ Garcia, and now we had Keegan Johnson return for this Kansas State team. Should help them in future games. But honestly, Keegan Johnson wasn't used a ton in that first game. He had just an 18% route rate, still ran clearly behind RJ Garcia, Phillip Brooks, and Jaden Jackson. Tight end Ben Sano has been my favorite player to play from this team so far, but now he's up at 4,500. I would rather play Jaden Jackson at this point. With that said, I'm worried about Jackson getting sniped by Keegan Johnson for routes at some point because Keegan Johnson comes off the injury. He's clearly one of their most talented 3 receivers. That still probably leaves me to Sano. Again, I haven't built. We're early on in the process for me, earlier than usual, but honestly, I don't have as much interest in the Kansas State passing attack as I normally do because their prices are increasing. They're playing somewhat fast compared to normal, but it's not great. Pass rate's not great, and the matchup is going to be very difficult. Not to mention, like, Will Howard's 8,200. On the other side, Brady Cook is 68. They're almost, I mean, Will Howard, I think, is more talented, but these guys occupy a similar role where they're largely game managers with some mobility, and Brady Cook has better mobility. Only 12 yards on the ground so far to start the year, but they played some cupcakes. You watched the Middle Tennessee State game last week. The box score doesn't look great, but that team just took their foot way off the gas and gave up a touchdown into safety in the final 4 minutes. So not as close as the box score indicates. Brady Cook was not being used. He will be here. Going to be a tough matchup for him. Kansas State did lose a lot in their secondary, loss of premier edge rusher. So maybe they're a little more exploitable. These are the reasons why I bet Missouri, but I think it opens the door for Brady Cook. What I will say is I like his price on FanDuel a little more at 8,100, but I'm not Xing him out of my player pool. I anticipate having a little more Cook than Howard on the other side. Backfield, a bit of a committee. Cody Schrader has out-touched Nathaniel Pete 44-26. Last year, you could almost lock in Schrader for 20 touches. If this ratio holds, I'm a little worried about the workload for Schrader. He's potentially worth a gamble at 7,300, but you're getting awfully close to some really like premier studs. If there's risk of a timeshare, I'm not going to be heavily invested. The receiving game is interesting to me. You have two clear alphas, I suppose is the word. Like Burden's an alpha. He has 18 targets through 2 games. 5,900 is a nice affordable price tag on him. Theo Weiss has a 96% route share. He's coming in at 4,800. Even Mookie Cooper, and Mookie only has 1 target on the year, but he has a 92% route rate at 4,400. I like playing cheap Missouri guys. I don't think they're going to be particularly owned. Next up, we've got Louisville taking on Indiana, 10-point spread in favor of the Cardinals, 52.5 total. Louisville just played Murray State, didn't show anything, played 5 quarterbacks, but competitive-ish game the first time out. Plummer at 66 is somewhat viable. You have the Jeff Brom offense, which clearly has not shown anything. If you go back and reference these numbers for Purdue last year, like 90th in pace, they're going to be faster. 47.5% pass rate. They're going to throw a lot more. So Plummer, he's not quite what Will Rogers was last year, but we're talking about largely a non-mobile guy. A lot of these rushing yards came against Murray State, so take that for what it's worth. As you can see, he's only been sacked once. These numbers are going to change a little bit throughout the year. He's been a negative rusher through his career. Anyway, the pass rate and the pace should be conducive to Plummer hitting 300-yard bonuses decently often here, which is why I do have interest in him, especially stacking. I'll skip over running back for a second and talk the receivers. Jamari Thrash at 5,300. Holy smokes. His route rate's only 78% because they absolutely demolished Murray State. This is a guy that's going to be out here 90+% of the time with a locked-in target share. I mean, he's the most explosive playmaker on this offense, and I actually think pretty highly of Amari Huggins-Bruce. I like Jimmy Callaway and Kevin Coleman as well. The problem with those players, they have 3 more of them. So you've got Thrash locked into a role. Now you're basically rotating your next 3 guys, and they do use 4 wide quite a bit here. But once you extend that out, you get Chris Bell in there once in a while, Allen Houston. Like these guys are going to pop up for a couple targets here and there. Not to mention they'll rotate in tight ends like Joey Gatewood, Nate Kursky, those players as well. The backfield I don't have a lot of interest in. I am anticipating the return of Maurice Turner in week 1. 6 carries for Garendo, 7 for Jordan, 7 for Turner, just not consolidated enough in my opinion. Jawar Jordan has some pretty gaudy stats, averaging 115 yards per game. Go look up the like 70-yard touchdowns he's ripped off in back-to-back weeks. It won't persist forever. On the Indiana side, they're starting Taven Jackson now, but all indications are they're going to use 2 quarterbacks. Skip over that. Running back, they've kind of phased out Christian Turner. It's just Jalen Lucas and Josh Henderson. They're implied for 21 points, which isn't the worst we've seen on Indiana recently. But do we get enough work between the 2 of them? I would be shocked. If I'm playing one of them, it's Henderson. But 5,200, you could do better on this slate price adjusted. He would be just the deepest GPP option. Receiver's interesting to me. Cam Camper left their last game again. The guy just can't stay healthy. I feel really bad. But allegedly, he's going to play here. He should be their clear wide receiver 1 when healthy. They also had EJ Williams exit with an injury. Watch his status. He's not any good anyway. But what this has kind of done is narrowed opportunity. Sorry, can't speak. Donovan McCulley, he's been above 75% of the routes in back-to-back weeks. You could certainly take a shot on McCulley. And then Omar Cooper, a lot of people might use him after the 10 target game last week. He had a 44% route share. Now, that's awesome. Do they use him as a clear receiving option? Like DeCoos Carter, 49%. Cam Camper only played in 39% of the routes. He's definitely playing almost every route when he's healthy. You had, tight ends. They used tight ends in almost every play. Honestly, they used 12 personnel a fair amount. Route shares, Archer was at 54. Bamba was at 37. Steinfeld was at 12. So I think this is a spot where you might see Cooper get squeezed, and maybe he comes in popular with 10 targets last week. Kind of Cam Camper, McCulley, or bust, in my opinion. Georgia, Southern, Wisconsin, and man, I don't know if there's a team I've lost more money on than Wisconsin to start this year. Rip to me. 19-point spread in favor of the Badgers, 64.5 total. Georgia Southern runs the real air raid. People will tell you Wisconsin's running the air raid. They're running the neutered air raid right now. Georgia Southern is full air raid. Davis Brin's their quarterback. Many of you know him from his previous stop, but this offense is going to 300-yard bonus him in a lot of games. Wisconsin's secondary has been pretty bad to start the year. Only 6 yards per attempt, but Buffalo played in week 1 who cannot throw, and Washington State moved the ball on them relatively easily. I don't love Brin's price. He's not a rusher, so he's not a preferred player or anything like that, but you could get crazier in GPPs. Backfield's going to be somewhat of a committee. It's kind of about a 70-30 split between Jalen White and O.J. Arnold. Not the best price on these guys, but they will catch some passes, so they're not the craziest either. Where I do think you can play these Georgia Southern guys is in the receiving core, and I like them primarily as runbacks to Wisconsin stacks. Derwin Burgess has 18 targets this year, Caleb Hood 16, J.J. McAfee, their tight end, at 14, Anthony Quealy, the Syracuse transfer, at 12. All of them are on the field a ton. The player with the shakiest role is McAfee, and that's just because they're going to use some 3 wide sets. Dalen Cobb comes in for those when they go 4 wide. That comes at the expense of McAfee. Burgess, Hood, and Quealy are full-time receivers. No issues with any of them. Wisconsin, Mordecai's been disappointing. He's also had some egregious drops by his receivers. The week 1 drop, I can't remember who it was. A bomb right in their hands would have been a surefire 60-plus yard touchdown drop. So, not everything has gone Mordecai's way. Some his own fault, some fault of his receivers, some the fault of his offensive line. Regardless, he's a player with decent mobility. He hasn't shown it much this year. That's a problem for me. Wisconsin has a 52% pass rate. They were trailing last game. They're now 19-point favorites. What does that pass rate look like in a run-heavy game script? We saw in week 1, they're very willing to embrace the run here. With that said, Braylon Allen and Ches Malusi are in a 50-50 timeshare. The only difference is they're using Braylon Allen on 50% of the routes, and Ches Malusi is not playing on third downs, which is funny. Braylon Allen leads the team in targets with 14. He's just too expensive for this role, man. Maybe you could play him efficiency-wise, but Braylon Allen at 7,500, we need Ches Malusi injured or something, as crazy as that sounds. Receiving game, I think you are moving towards a top 3. I had to include the FCS schools in my route document this week, so it takes me a little longer to get to the teams. Excuse the filibustering, but top 3 receivers, I think you've got Will Pauling in the slot. He had a 73% route rate last week. On the perimeter, it was basically Bryson Green and Shamir Dike every single play. Skylar Bell rotated in for a 49% route rate. CJ Williams at 41%. They're not using a lot of tight ends, and they had a couple tight ends leave the program in the offseason. Hayden Rucci, 51% of the routes. Tucker Ashcraft at 14. Wisconsin's running a decent amount of 4 wide, but I still prefer them in no particular order. It would be Will Pauling, Bryson Green, and Shamir Dike. And honestly, Bryson Green's price at 4,600 is the most attractive to me, especially behind that 80% route share last week. If you need a Stone Min guy, CJ Williams at the Stone Min, again, he was nearly active for 50% of the routes. There's better options, but a lot of you sometimes need a Stone Min guy. He's the first one that really pops for me. Central Michigan, Notre Dame, 34-point spread in favor of the Irish. Huge look-ahead spot. If I'm not mistaken, it's Ohio State next week. 51.5 total. Central Michigan doesn't pass a lot. They have Bert Emanuel under center. Jace Bowers playing less and less. Played a decent amount week 1, less in week 2. Competitive game against an FCS team for Central. They're slow. They're run-heavy. Bert Emanuel really does it all. Still, I don't like his price at 6,100. Notre Dame would probably need to take their foot off the gas. And again, Central Michigan's implied for under 9 points. This is a team you should X out entirely, more than likely, unless you're getting really crazy. Stephen Bracey, Chris Parker would be the names to know in the receiving core. Jalen McGahee hasn't played a lot. They rotate running backs between Miles Bailey, BJ Harris, Marion Lukes. So it's kind of a naked Bert Emanuel or pass, and we've spent too much time on Central Michigan. Let's get to Notre Dame. Some Florida State vibes here with the look ahead. Hartman has negative rushing yards. They're just not using him in design stuff. They haven't really been tested. Even NC State couldn't give them a game. But that's interesting to me. Hartman was a lot more mobile in his previous stop, Wake Forest. So we'll see if this changes, but Kern OC is using him as a pure pocket passer. He's going to need 300-yard bonuses. The implied team total suggests he can get there, and he probably can through efficiency. But that spread also suggests to me is we probably see backup quarterbacks in this game sometime in the second half. Audric Estime doesn't have the best role in football. He's touching the ball 15.7 times per game, but hyper efficient. It's not always efficient for him, but like he's the kind of guy that can break off a long run. I'm going to mess this Twitter name up, so I'm just going to probably tweet this out later. So there's an analytics account that uses AI and GPS tracking to do GPS, essentially mile per hour times for these guys. Audric Estime was in the top 5 last week for fastest ball carriers. The guy's 240 pounds. He's not quite Derrick Henry, but he's kind of got some Derrick Henry vibes between his size and his speed. Even if he gets stuffed at the line a couple times, he's always live to break off a long one. And against Central, it's probably more likely than not. You just have to get there on fewer touches than some of these other backs. Like he doesn't have the Quinshon Judkins workload. Receiving game, this is really hard to get to in my opinion. Like Jaden Thomas plays the most. I'll pull up their routes in their most competitive games. So hopefully this gives you a better indication compared to the season-long routes. Jaden Thomas, last game at 72%. Their next most active receiver was actually Tobias Merriweather at 55. And then I guess if you want to include Mitch Evans, he was at 76. He might just be the safest guy in the receiving core right now because they're slowly and surely getting Jaden Greathouse, their highly recruited freshman, more and more snaps. That's coming at the expense of Chris Tyree, Tobias Merriweather, Rico Flores, the ancillary receivers. So that'd be interesting to see where Greathouse goes in terms of routes. The last couple of weeks, he's gone 28%. That was against Navy, 45%. And then last week against NC State, he was back down to 28. So at least worth mentioning here. And last thing, I'm not playing any of the Notre Dame backups. They're all too expensive. At running back, South Carolina, Georgia, 27.5 point spread, 54 total. I'm debating betting Georgia, honestly. I think they named their score here. Georgia's only had 2 defenders play at least 50% of the snaps. Their metrics don't look great, but they are not trying at all. And they still look pretty good. I mean, it's Georgia. Rattler's unplayable, takes too many sacks. He's 7,500. Their implied team totals under 14. He's going to get eaten by this defensive line. South Carolina could not run the ball against North Carolina. They're now facing Georgia. I'm not playing Dak Joyner or Juju McDowell. Their receiving core should get a couple guys back from injury. Antwain Wells we're expecting back. He's going to have to alpha his way there. Legette's been really good, but he's also been banged up. Amarine Brown is questionable for this game. His potential absence, I think, would open the door for guys like Eddie Lewis, Omega Blake, but they're going to use a tight end. That would be a split between Josh Simon and Trey Knox. This team is really hard to play against Georgia. It's an Antwain Wells, Xavier Legette, or pass. Georgia, Carson Beck has been solid, but they haven't played anybody. So it's kind of like, all right, unlike Ohio State, you did exactly what you were supposed to do. So you can play Beck. If Beck actually ends up being like a true stud, he might not be this price ever again, but I don't really know how high he can rise because he doesn't run. So, I mean, maybe you see him get to like 9K, but definitely a good matchup here against South Carolina. Terrible defense on the other side. South Carolina lost 2 NFL corners. You can stack him. I do not think we see Ladd McConkey. He hasn't practiced yet. But Brock Bowers and Dominic Lovett, these guys are going to play way more in competitive games. 4,700 for Bowers is laughable. He should probably be in your cash lineup. Lovett's too cheap. Arian Smith's too cheap. He was banged up all last year. I expect his route rate to jump from 52%. I also expect Marcus Rosemy-Jacksaint to be more involved. He's 4,900. I think their base 3 receiver set is going to be Lovett, Arian Smith, Marcus Rosemy-Jacksaint with Brock Bowers at tight end. They'll use 2 tight ends a fair amount. That will be Oscar Delp. when they rotate receivers off the field, which they have the luxury of doing, I anticipate that being mostly Marcus Rosemy-Jacksaint or Arian Smith for the likes of Dylan Bell, Mekhi Muse. Ra Thomas is a guy they'll play a little bit here too, Mississippi State transfer. Again, I'm focusing on the guys at the top. They're just too cheap. Run game, I think we see Dawan Edwards back for this team. He hasn't played yet, but they haven't needed him to. I think that mostly hurts Roderick Robinson. They already lost Branson Robinson for the year, but Kendall Milton's locked into his role. He's also the pass catching back. He would be the guy I want to play. And I honestly am going to mix and match Kendall Milton. He could have a big game against South Carolina. They're not as deep as normal. And I mean, that's a luxury, honestly, for them in past years. Like losing Branson Hurst, they have 5 stars really everywhere, but I don't know if they trust these guys yet. It's a lot of youth, but they play teams like South Carolina to iron this out. It's Kendall Milton, Dawan Edwards, or pass here for me. Bama, USF, 32-point total. Bama's implied for 47, 62-point total overall. Fast game, USF is first in pace. Bama's coming off the Texas loss. They're going to murder this USF team. Jalen Milroe, I don't know if he plays the whole game after last time, and we've already seen Bama victory against Middle Tennessee State. They're going to involve Buckner and Simpson a little bit. But Milroe has elite rushing upside. I think you could throw him in tournaments. Running back, it's Jason McClellan ahead of Roy Dell Williams and Jam Miller. Don't like the price on any of them, really, but I mean, you want to sprinkle these guys for sure. They're going to be slaughtering USF. And then in the pass game, Bond and Burton are the top 2 receivers. The third receiver is Ben Malik Benson, 46% route rate ahead of Kobe Prentice at 35. Amari Niblack is the primary tight end they're using right now. They have not used Maryland transfer CJ Dippre here. So Niblack, the tight end at 4 flat is interesting. The cheaper, the better. I don't know how much Alabama is going to be throwing in this game. That's why I like Milroe, McClellan, Roy Dell, and Jam Miller more than anyone else here. You're probably not playing USF guys. At least I wouldn't recommend it. Their team total is 15. Byron Brown is a elite dual threat, but they're not passing a ton, 39% pass rate. Their running back field is a 3-way committee between Naquan Wright, the Florida transfer, Michelle Dukes, Clemson transfer, and K'Wan Powell. Receiving game, a little difficult to decipher. Their top 3 have been Sean Atkins, Naeem Simmons, and Khafre Brown. They're also rotating in like Texas transfer, Jaden Alexis, Minnesota transfer, Michael Brown-Stevens. Both of them have missed a game. So, I mean, maybe they change up their starting receivers. Maybe you could throw a dart on like Alexis at 31, but yeah, I'm not playing a lot of USF guys. Next up, San Diego State, Oregon State, 25-point spread in favor of Oregon State. And the total is 49 points overall. San Diego State's been crushed by UCLA. Oregon State's rolled a couple teams, San Jose State and an FCS school. Neither team passes much. San Diego State's been forced into it. They don't want to. They have a converted safety under center at 6,500. Maiden can't throw. He's entirely reliant on his legs, and they've already played 3 games, so 184 rush yards doesn't look quite as good as you might think. Also facing the strength of Oregon State's defense is their front 7. Most of their departures came in their secondary. 4-way committee at running back, ignore that. Their top receivers, their tight end, Mark Redmond. Yikes. The only thing I'll say here is Felipe Wesley, he played his first game. His route share was awesome. So at 30, I mean, you're playing a San Diego State guy. Take this for what it's worth. But in their first game back, Felipe Wesley, 84% routes, 5 targets. This passing attack sucks, but I mean, you need a 3,100 guy. Like, he's going to play a lot. Anyway, let's get to the more interesting team, Oregon State. If San Diego State can keep this competitive, they probably see Uiagalelei run a little more. Only 21 yards to start the year. He's hyper mobile. I mean, he's lost weight. He's great at running. They're just not asking him to do it. And then he's not throwing either. He's averaging 18.5 attempts per game. They've slaughtered 2 teams, but they're taking tons of money, and they're quickly approaching 4 touchdown favorites. Do we think Uiagalelei gets 20 pass attempts? For $9K, it's too expensive. What we can do is play Damian Martinez. Their first game was more competitive against San Jose, and again, they played an FCS last week. And we saw the split in carries, 19 in favor of Damian, and Deshaun Fenwick coming in at 8. We also saw the routes favor Martinez in that game. They flipped in the most recent game. They just blew out an FCS team. So I guess I should say week 1, the route share between these guys, you had Martinez at 50%. Fenwick was down around 30. It almost flipped last week because of the blowout. All this to say, Damian Martinez, I think, is one of the best price-adjusted running backs on the slate, whether or not Deshaun Fenwick carves into this, and he probably should. They run the ball a ton. Not to mention, San Diego State is allowing 5 yards per carry. They have a great secondary. That's where they returned all their production. They are replacing a ton up front on defense. They're going to get gashed here. Receiving game, Anthony Gould's expected back. They sat him out against the FCS school. He's hyper efficient. I do not think they throw the ball enough for him to be used here. And then I think your next 2 receivers are Silas Bolden. He's too expensive at $6K. And Josiah Irish, too expensive at $5K. But they're going to rotate that third receiver. You're going to see Zachary Card. You're going to see double tight end sets on occasion. It's not easy to predict the 3. Northwestern Duke, another fun game here. 18.5 point spread in favor of Duke, 48.5 total. We get into some really interesting options for both sides. Ben Bryant's been banged up, but he's supposed to play in this game. Not mobile at all, but Northwestern plays fast. They're 35th in pace, and they have a heavy pass rate, up around 53%. Bryant has been banged up. I don't love him as an individual play, but I love him for potentially bringing this game over the total and keeping it competitive enough where we can play Duke guys. On the running back front here, Cam Porter got game scripted out immediately against Rutgers. They slaughtered UTEP, so 17 carries for Porter was encouraging here. He also played a decent amount in the pass game. He's now had 5 and 2 targets. Porter's way too cheap, and I know they're 18.5 point underdogs, but if this plays like closer to the spread than we think it is, like 4,300 is ridiculous for a guy that has a feature back workload. Or at least close to it. Maybe it's not like full Quinshon Judkins workload, but it's not. He's got a pretty good workload here to be 4,300. Receiving game, you've got 3 clear top receivers, Cam Johnson, AJ Henning, and Bryce Kurtz, who returned from his injury. Kurtz immediately came back, played almost every single route. 4,100 is fine for him. These are guys I like using. Really cheap dart throws, pass-heavy offense. You're kind of relying on the back door to some degree. Like, how many touchdowns do they really score here? But you're going to get a lot of PPR value. On the Duke side, Riley Leonard should probably be in your cash lineup. He's 6,700. This is one of the worst pricings on this slate. Duke has a 33.5 implied team total. Riley Leonard has excellent mobility. He's already over 100 yards on the year, and he's hyper efficient as a passer. Duke played an FCS school last week. These numbers are going to be better in more competitive games, and they're kind of middling this year. You know, they played Clemson, then they play FCS, Lafayette, they killed them. Now they're playing Northwestern, who's basically like smack dab in the middle between Clemson and an FCS. So right away, Northwestern should push you enough where you need to keep your foot on the gas, but not get blown out to the point where we see backups. Anyway, backfield here, we have Jalen Coleman maybe returning. Without him, they've used Jordan Waters and Jaquez Moore mostly. Last week, they involved Peyton Jones, but again, FCS school. Receiving game, exactly what we expected. It's Jalen Calhoun, Jordan Moore, and Samir Higgins. I think you can play any of them. They're all very good price-adjusted plays. Duke stacks are super live here. For contrarian people, I would be looking at Higgins more than anyone. But honestly, Calhoun's been so bad to start the year. He has a bunch of drops. Maybe you can get to an expensive Calhoun. I anticipate Jordan Moore being the most owned. He also runs the ball a little bit on occasion. Former quarterback is Jordan Moore. Tight end has been a bit of a rotation. Not quite as enticing as most years. Damelin still 76% route rate. Wish it was a little higher, but maybe pure punts you could get to him too. I'd rather play Higgins. Couple games left. Western Kentucky, Ohio State. This is an awesome game for DFS, 64 total. We know Western Kentucky runs the air raid. Ohio State is Ohio State. 28-point spread in favor of the Buckeyes. Austin Reed is really cheap here. I don't hate him for cash. He's going to throw the ball so much. He's averaging 41.5 attempts per game. Even if this gets to blowout territory, Western Kentucky is going to play Austin Reed, and he's going to throw the ball a million times. The back door for 300 yards is going to be open here. So we're towards the end of the slate, but these are some of the quarterbacks I like most. The backfield, LT Sanders is expected to return. He was listed second on the depth chart to start the year, but got hurt immediately. I think that just further muddles a backfield where you've seen Irving Poindexter, Marquise Stepp, and Elijah Young all play. Not playing any of them. Receiving game has a ton of injuries. Okay, so Michael Matheson still not practicing. Malachi Corley is expected to play. He's the wide receiver 1. No questions asked. Craig Burt has been injured. You also had, oh man, not Jarrett Stern, Josh Stearns, excuse me. Josh Stearns has been injured too. So what does this receiving room look like? I'm just going to go right to the projections and kind of read the way I predicted this, because I think it's somewhat volatile depending on who's active and who's not. So right now we have Malachi Corley projected as the very clear wide receiver one at 4,700. He is a phenomenal value. Blue Smith is the 2. Easton Messer, the 3. Then we get down to Jimmy Holiday and Craig Burt, some rotation 3 and 4 here. And the players that really would benefit from any one of these guys being out. So again, you've got Dalvin Smith has already been ruled out here. Craig Burt is injured. Josh Stearns is injured. If Corley sits for whatever reason, the biggest beneficiaries would be Jimmy Holiday. And then I think you start seeing more Musa Berry and KD Hutchinson. Very difficult. Watch Twitter for this. I don't know what's wrong with Burt or Stearns. Again, I expect we see Corley back. He's by far the best guy. And then I would rank them Corley, Blue Smith, Easton Messer. Trying to get one of those 3 guys. I think they're awesome plays. Hutchinson, I guess, would be 4 if you forced me to rank them. But he doesn't play as much. All right. Ohio State. Kyle McCord, 9,400. Doesn't run. Needs a 300-yard bonus. Very likely to get that here. 46 implied team total for Ohio State. You can play McCord. Make sure you stack him. Don't care who you use. Marvin Harrison, Emeka Ibuka are both awesome. Ibuka's cheaper. He gets rushing attempts. Target share last year was right on par with Harrison. This year there's a decent gap. But expect this to normalize throughout the year. Ibuka should be the 2. Fleming's your 3, 6,800. I'd rather find the salary to play Ibuka. Tight end Kate Stover has been used in more of a rotation this year than ever before with G. Scott and Joe Royer. Makes him a little less viable, but at 3,800, beggars can't be choosers. He's still live. And the one interesting thing here is Carnell Tate. The route rate's not great yet, but he's the 5-star freshman. He's already 5,700. Like, come on, DraftKings. This guy should be 3,200 right now. He doesn't play enough. But we can't play him. But Harrison, Fleming, Ibuka. My preference is Ibuka. Price adjusted. All 3 are good plays. Oh, running back field. Before I skip over Trevion Henderson and Mine Williams, they're using Chip Trayanum in this rotation. Very difficult to get to when there's 3 of them active. My question is, when games are competitive, do they narrow this? Unfortunately, 28-point spread. We're not going to see that here. Tulane, Southern Miss, 13-point spread in favor of Tulane. The Green Wave, 49.5 total. Michael Pratt is one of the better price-adjusted plays, I think, if he's fully healthy. The unfortunate thing is you can't guarantee me that. We won't know. We honestly won't even know if he's playing until game time. His mobility could be compromised. It's a knee injury for Pratt. Very, very risky. I would love to play him at full health. Unfortunately, we just don't have that news. If he's out, Kai Horton handled himself fine against Ole Miss. I don't think he's as mobile as Pratt, but Horton at 73 would not be the worst play. I would definitely sprinkle him in GPPs. Running back, Mekhi Hughes, man, bursts onto the scene after using 4 backs in the first week. 22 carries for Mekhi Hughes. I mean, my goodness. Only problem is they don't use him in the pass game. 18% route rate. Very clearly not active in this department. So Shady Clayton Johnson has the highest route rate. You're worried about Mekhi Hughes in certain matchups. As nearly 2 touchdown favorites, I think you could throw some darts on him. He's 4,600. It's risky. Like Shedra Lewis does play a little bit. Shady Clayton Johnson plays a little bit. They did not play Celestine at all. But still a risky committee to bet on here. I'm going to play some Hughes with that set. Receiving game is not risky at all. You know exactly who's getting the ball. Lawrence Keys, Jaquan Jackson, Chris Brazell. They're the receivers on every single snap almost. Alex Bauman, their tight end, has an 82% route rate. When they do rotate guys on the field, Dante Fleming and Keith Brown are the 2 guys that come in occasionally, but we're talking about guys with under a 10% route rate at times, especially in the competitive games. I mean, play these guys. These are good plays, especially if Pratt's out there. Like Chris Brazell at 4,800 should be a consideration for cash. Southern Miss, they've been passing a lot, but they killed a team. They got killed by a team. So they're 1-1 with 2 blowouts on either side. Billy Wiles has not been good. He takes sacks. He can't run. He's not a good passer either. 5,300 is not cheap enough. You should be paid to roster him. The backfield, they're not using Frank Gore's a bell cow anymore. Rodriguez-Clark has actually outcarried him 23-17. Frank Gore is the touch edge 24-23. In the receiving game and more competitive games, I expect this to narrow a little bit. Jacarius Caston, he should be the 1. Kylan Mims should be the 2. And then I think the 3 is probably Latrell Jones, but this will be a rotation. Brandon Hayes and Tyquan Henderson are going to play a little bit for this team in the pass game as well. But again, if I'm throwing darts, it would be Jacarius Caston to Kylan Mims. This team throws a lot, so I don't hate using these guys as a one-off. In a kind of a sneaky game, if Pratt plays, expect the total to rise. Last one and worst one, FCS, Weber State, Utah. We don't have the line yet. Again, I've been poor at projecting FCS lines. I was previously using SP+. They haven't been great either. So just full disclosure, I am using 38 points as the spread and 50 as the total until they come out. They will be reflected in projections. Anyway, Weber State, they do not pass a lot. Kylan Weezer is their quarterback. He's not the most mobile guy. I'm not playing an FCS guy against Utah. There's way better ways to use your money. I'm not playing anyone on this team, just for reference. If I was, it would be Damon Bankston. 21 carries. He's the stone man. People will probably play him, but man, like opportunity cost is a real thing. If you play Bankston and he gets blanked by Utah, it's great you saved a lot of money at 3K, but you could have used that elsewhere. Utah, I don't think we see rising against an FCS school. I don't think we see Keithy against an FCS school. I think conference play is probably where they were targeting the whole time. Anyway, they use Bryson Barnes as their thrower. Nate Johnson plays their dual threat Wildcat stuff. I'm not playing a Utah quarterback. I am going to play Jaquindon Jackson. This is cheap for him. Micah Bernard's out for the year. Jalen Glover is a player they're going to use as a change of pace, but Jaquindon Jackson, 19 carries in the last game. This guy has a decent pass game role. He was up around 40% of the routes last week. And again, Bernard was their pass catching back. So you're going to see this 25% route share on the year. One of the biggest things I was looking for when that injury was announced is, all right, what are they going to do with the pass catching back? It had been Bernard. And then we look at the routes from their first game without him. Encouraging for Jaquindon Jackson. Just shy of 40%. He has a floor in the pass game now, making him an excellent play across the board. Easy matchup. Love Jaquindon Jackson. Top wide receivers here, Devon Vele and Money Parks. Devon Vele clearly ahead from a target perspective. The one thing you're worried about here is Mikey Matthews taking on more and more. He's their highly recruited freshman. His route rate is now 50%. He's seen 4 and 5 targets over the last 2 weeks. With him, he has upside to play a lot. I mean, he's a freshman, so he could take routes away from Money Parks at some point. I wouldn't be surprised. Or maybe they just stop rotating in Micah Pittman and Emery Simmons. I would suggest they do that anyway if I were making suggestions to the coaching staff, but alas, I am not. Last thing, Thomas Yasmin plays a ton. He's the tight end fill-in for Brant Keithy right now. Up around 70% of the routes in their competitive games. $3,400 is a generous price tag on Thomas Yasmin. That does it for the slate. I think I hit everything, but if I missed something, please leave a comment. Just leave a comment regardless. Let me know what you think. If you have suggestions, I'm trying to incorporate more ownership talk. That was a suggestion. You know what? Somebody did ask me to rank these players at a position. Unfortunately, I'm not like hyper equipped to do that today, recording this early. But just, I guess, to give you a few names at the various positions. A few guys I like, Jaquindon Jackson for sure. I like Riley Leonard among the quarterbacks. Receiver, I think you could definitely like. I don't want to come on here and just say play like the Ohio State guys, but there's a ton of really cheap options at receiver across the board for some of these teams. I like the Duke stacks with Leonard. And yeah, I'll try to do a better job of this. But for now, unfortunately, we'll have to save that for future shows. I'll make sure to rank these guys in live before lock on Saturday. But that'll do it for us. I'm on Twitter at Matt_Gajewski. If you have a question, until next time, good luck.